Far in the north, where winter stretched longer than memory itself, where the mountains wear crowns of snow and the night sky glows with rivers of green and violet light, stories are born that never fade. These tales are older than kings, older than the rise of cities, older even than the memory of men. They live in the breath of the wind, in the echo of the sea against frozen cliffs, and in the silent strength of the pine forests. Among these stories there is one that carries both awe and dread, the story of Fenrir, the great wolf of destiny. He was no ordinary beast. His name is whispered across the 9 realms as a symbol of inevitability, a creature bound not just by chains, but by the very fabric of fate. But before Fenrir grew to his terrible might, before the shadow of Ragnarok stretched across the world, he was born. And like all things, his tale begins small, with a family shaped in both darkness and power. In the Ironwood, a deep and haunted forest far beyond the gaze of Asgard, dwelled a giantess named Angrboda. Her name meant she who brings sorrow. The forest around her seemed to carry her essence. Trees twisted like old secrets, mists that never lifted, and silence that pressed upon the skin like a second weight. It was here that Loki, the trickster god, came. Loki was restless by nature, neither fully of the gods, nor fully apart from them. He thrived in chaos, in whispers, in the cracks between order and ruin. In Angrboda, he found not a mirror but a complement, someone who carried within her a power raw and untamed, a shadow as fierce as his fire. From their union came 3 children, each unlike any being the 9 realms had ever seen. The first was Hel, a girl whose face was divided, one half living and beautiful, the other half pale and corpse-like, belonging already to death. The second was Jormungandr, the serpent so vast it would one day encircle Midgard itself, biting its own tail. And the third, the one whose story we now tell, was Fenrir, a wolf pup, black as midnight, whose eyes burned like molten embers. From the very first cry, it was clear that Fenrir was no ordinary creature. His howl carried across valleys, echoing against mountains as if the world itself listened. The animals of the forest fell silent when he stirred, and even the trees seemed to lean closer, wary of his presence. In Asgard, the home of the gods, the cry of Fenrir reached divine ears. Odin, the All-Father, sat upon his high throne and heard it with the depth of one who sees beyond the veil of the present. His wisdom, bought at the cost of an eye, granted him glimpses of what was to come. And in that echo of a newborn wolf, he foresaw shadows of doom. He spoke little of what he saw, but in his silence lay a heavy truth. The children of Loki were destined to play great roles in the twilight of the gods. Hel would rule the dead, Jormungandr would rise from the sea, and Fenrir would grow so great that even the gods themselves would tremble before him. Still, in those first days, Fenrir was but a pup. He tumbled in the leaves, gnawed upon roots, and rested his head upon his mother's side. But his growth was unnatural, his strength greater than any wolf before him. With every passing season he grew larger, fiercer, hungrier. The gods decided they could not leave him in the Ironwood. They brought him to Asgard, not out of love but out of fear, hoping that under their watchful gaze, they might keep his power contained. When Fenrir crossed the shining bridge of Bifrost, the gods gathered to see him. They expected a beast, a monster already snarling at their heels. But what they saw was a pup, though a pup larger than a full-grown hound, his eyes burning too brightly, his paws already heavy enough to leave dents in the ground. Thor frowned, gripping his hammer. Freya tilted her head with pity, as though she sensed the loneliness in the creature already. Odin studied him quietly, as one might study a storm forming at the edge of the horizon. And then there was Tyr. Tyr, the god of war and justice, stepped forward when the others held back. Where Thor saw only threat, where Odin saw only fate, Tyr saw something else, a living being young and unshaped. He knelt before the wolf and placed his hand upon Fenrir's head. The pup tilted his head, and for the first time, his fierce gaze softened. Thus began a bond unlike any other in Asgard. It was Tyr who fed Fenrir, for no other god dared approach the beast. It was Tyr who trained with him, who wrestled in play, who spoke to him beneath the stars. Fenrir, who trusted no one, trusted Tyr. And though he grew stronger with each passing day, though his body stretched beyond the size of any wolf the realms had known, there was still something almost gentle in the way he looked at this one god. But the others whispered. The halls of Asgard rang with debate. Should Fenrir be destroyed before his strength outgrew their control? Could they bear to keep him near, knowing he might be their ruin? Thor argued for destruction. Why keep the wolf if it is destined to bite? He said. Others wavered, torn between fear and pity. Odin sat in silence, his one eye fixed on a vision beyond their sight. He knew what must come. He had seen the wolf grown vast, his jaws wide enough to swallow the sun, his shadow falling across the world. He knew there was no avoiding fate. But the gods, bound to their own pride, still sought to delay it. And so Fenrir roamed the meadows of Asgard, growing larger with every moon. He played, he hunted, he rested. But in the laughter of the gods there was always an edge of unease. In their smiles, a shadow of dread. Fenrir, still young, felt it though he could not name it. He knew only that apart from Tyr he was alone. Time in Asgard moved differently than in Midgard. Seasons passed not with the planting and harvest of men, but with festivals, battles, and the endless councils of gods. For Fenrir, each passing season marked a startling change. What began as a wolf pup soon grew into a beast taller than the tallest hound, with shoulders broad enough to rival an ox. His paws struck the earth like drums, and his voice, when he howled, rolled across the skies like thunder. The gods could no longer mistake him for something small, something manageable. He was becoming what fate intended, something vast, something terrible. Yet for all his size there was still youth in him. He bounded across the meadows of Asgard, chasing after the golden leaves that drifted from Yggdrasil's branches. He rolled in the grass, snapping playfully at the clouds that shifted above. And when the moon rose high, he lay stretched upon the ground, his head resting against Tyr's knee as the god told him stories of the 9 realms. Tyr spoke of the dwarves who forged treasures in the heart of the earth, of the elves whose laughter echoed in hidden groves, of the giants who lived beyond the seas of ice. Fenrir listened, his fiery eyes softening in the glow of starlight. Though he did not speak as men spoke, he understood. He understood the cadence of Tyr's voice, the weight of his words, the quiet promise that in this god at least, he was not entirely alone. But in the golden halls of Asgard, unease spread like frost. Night after night, the gods gathered in council. Their words rose and fell like the clash of swords. Each day the wolf grows, Thor rumbled, his hammer resting heavy at his side. Each day he becomes more of a threat. Why do we nurture what we know will destroy us? Because it is not yet his time, Frigg, Odin's queen, replied softly. And fate is not so easily avoided. If he is meant to rise against us, then he will, no matter what we do. But must we raise him in our midst? Demanded Heimdall, ever watchful, the one who guarded Bifrost. Must we feed him, strengthen him, bring doom into our own home? Only Tyr spoke in defense of the wolf. He is more than prophecy, he said. He is a living creature. He knows kindness. He trusts me. If there is a way to alter what is written, it lies not in chains and suspicion, but in loyalty and honor. At this, Odin finally stirred. His single eye glimmered, not with hope, but with the heavy shadow of knowledge. The wolf will not be turned from his path, he said. Yet until that hour comes we must bind him close. We will watch. We will wait. And when the time is right we will act. His words settled over the council like falling snow, cold, inevitable and silent. Fenrir, though young, was not blind to the tension that hung in the air. He saw the way the gods fell silent when he entered. He felt the unease in their glances, the distance in their laughter. Even in moments of play he sensed the wall that separated him from them. At night, when Tyr slept beside him in the grass, Fenrir dreamed. His dreams were strange, filled with shadows and fire, seas that boiled and skies torn asunder. He saw himself grown impossibly vast, his jaws open wide enough to devour the sun. He saw Odin, cloaked in ravens, standing before him with spear in hand. He saw chains, gleaming and unbreakable, tightening around his limbs. He woke with a growl that shook the ground, his heart pounding like a war drum. But when Tyr's steady hand rested on his fur, he calmed. He closed his eyes again, pushing the visions into the quiet corners of his mind. Though Fenrir lived in Asgard, far from the ironwood where he had been born, he was not the only child of Loki to cast a shadow over the 9 realms. His siblings' destinies twined with his own. He heard whispers of his sister, Hel, sent away by Odin to rule the underworld, her half-living face presiding over halls of the dead. He heard murmurs of his brother, Jormungandr, hurled into the sea until he grew so vast he encircled Midgard. Though Fenrir did not see them, he felt them, like echoes in his blood, like the pull of the moon upon the tide. Sometimes in dreams he saw Hel's pale eyes watching him from the shadows, her voice like wind through graveyards. Sometimes he felt the shift of waters as Jormungandr stirred, the coil of a serpent whose size defied imagination. They were apart, and yet they were bound together, children of the same strange fate. Fenrir would lift his head to the stars and howl, long and mournful, as if calling across realms for the siblings he could not touch. His cry shook the walls of Asgard, and the gods shuddered in their sleep. Through it all, Tyr remained by his side. He trained Fenrir with patience, guiding his strength without cruelty. He walked with him at dawn when the world was still quiet, and sat with him at dusk when the sun painted the sky in fire and gold. Tyr spoke little of the council's words, though Fenrir could sense the weight upon him. Yet the god's resolve never faltered. He did not treat the wolf as a monster nor as a prophecy but as a companion. And for Fenrir that was enough. But even Tyr could not shield him forever. Fenrir's growth knew no limits. Each moon that passed left him larger than before, his body stretching beyond even the boldest imagination. His paws were the size of shields, his shoulders higher than the chest of a man, and his fangs gleamed like carved ivory. When he ran across the meadows of Asgard, the ground trembled beneath his weight. What had once been a pup that rolled in the grass was now a force of nature. The gods began to measure their halls against him, wondering how long before even the walls of Valhalla would seem small beside his might. Yet still in his heart Fenrir trusted Tyr. The god's voice could quiet his rage, his hand could calm the storm that brewed within him. But with each day the wolf noticed more clearly the unease in the eyes of the other gods. He smelled their fear as keenly as he smelled the rain in the air before a storm. And Fenrir began to wonder, was he truly welcome in this golden realm, or was he a guest only so long as he could be contained? Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, flew far and wide each day, bringing him news from every corner of the 9 realms. They perched upon his shoulders and whispered truths into his ear, truths that troubled even the All-Father. The prophecy spoke clearly. The wolf would grow vast beyond measure. The wolf would break his bonds. The wolf would one day stand in the final battle, jaws wide, and swallow Odin himself. Odin did not share these visions openly, but the weight of them hung heavy in the air. The other gods, though ignorant of the full detail, felt enough unease to demand action. "We cannot wait until the wolf is stronger than all of us," Thor thundered. "Each day we delay he becomes more dangerous. If fate decrees his rise, let us strike before he can rise at all." But others hesitated. "To kill him," Frigg murmured, "is to defy the threads of fate. And none who defy fate escape its weaving." So the gods reached a compromise. They would not kill Fenrir, not yet. Instead they would test his strength. They would bind him and see if he could be contained. The smiths of Asgard were called upon, and they forged a chain of iron, thick and heavy, each link wide enough for a man to step through. They named it Lading. Its weight was such that no mortal could hope to lift it, yet the gods carried it proudly to the meadow where Fenrir roamed. "Fenrir," they called, their voices falsely cheerful, "we have forged a chain mighty enough to hold even the strongest of beasts. Will you test your strength against it? Will you prove to us all that none can bind you?" The wolf regarded them in silence. His amber eyes flickered with suspicion, but his pride was as fierce as his hunger. Slowly he padded forward, his massive head swinging like a pendulum. "Very well," he growled, his voice low and rumbling, carrying like thunder over the plains. "Bind me if you wish. And when I break free, you will know the measure of my power." The gods wrapped the chain around his body, link after massive link clanking against his fur. They fastened it tight, driving stakes deep into the ground to hold him fast. For a moment silence fell, all eyes upon the wolf. Fenrir strained. His muscles coiled, his chest expanded, and with a single heave he snapped Lading as though it were no more than string. The iron links flew into the air, scattering across the field like sparks from a fire. The gods stepped back, unease gnawing at their hearts. Fenrir stood tall, his eyes gleaming with both satisfaction and scorn. "Your chains are nothing," he snarled. "Do not insult me with toys." Unwilling to admit defeat, the gods called again upon their smiths. This time they forged a chain twice as strong, twice as heavy, forged in the heat of divine forges where sparks fell like stars. They named it Dromi. Again they approached the wolf. Again they masked their fear with smiles. "Fenrir, the first chain was weak, unworthy of you," they said. "But this is a chain fit for a giant. Surely not even you could break free of this one." Fenrir's ears flicked back. He narrowed his eyes. "You seek to bind me again? Do you take me for a fool?" But pride is a fire difficult to extinguish. His heart beat with defiance, and though suspicion gnawed at him, he could not resist the challenge. "Very well," he said again. "Bind me, and I will show you that your might is nothing before mine." They wound Dromi around him, link after link, thicker than a tree's trunk. They drove stakes deeper, hammered them with Thor's own strength. And when the chain was fastened, they stood back, holding their breath. Fenrir braced himself. His muscles swelled beneath his dark fur, veins standing out like rivers of fire. With a roar that shook the heavens, he twisted, heaved, and pulled. The ground split beneath his paws, stones shattered, and with a final wrench, the chain burst apart. The pieces flew across the meadow like fragments of lightning. The gods shielded their faces as the mighty links fell in ruins. And Fenrir, standing free once more, lifted his head to the sky and howled. The sound rolled across Asgard, echoing against its golden walls. It was no longer the howl of a pup. It was the voice of something vast, something unstoppable. The gods trembled. The plain where Fenrir broke the second chain still bore scars. The ground lay cracked, gouged with deep furrows where his claws had torn the earth. Shattered links of iron glimmered under the sun like broken bones. The gods gathered there, their faces grim. 2 chains had failed, and with each failure the wolf grew not only stronger but prouder. Already he towered over them all, his head higher than the shoulders of Thor, his breath steaming in the cool air like smoke from a forge. "He cannot be contained," said Heimdall, his eyes never leaving the beast. "Every link we make he shatters. Every bond we trust he breaks." "Then we must craft something more than iron," Frigg whispered, her voice heavy with dread. Odin sat in silence, his one eye turned toward the wolf, but his thoughts wandered beyond. He had seen this moment in visions. He had seen the hour when the wolf would rise, and even the mightiest chains would snap like straw. But still he sought to delay the inevitable. If Fenrir could be bound even for a time, then Ragnarok might be held at bay. And so he gave the order. The gods would turn to those who could weave what no hand of man or god could forge. The gods traveled to Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves. In caverns deep beneath mountains, where the fires of the earth roared and sparks fell like rain, lived the greatest craftsmen in all the realms. These were the same who had forged Odin's spear Gungnir, Thor's hammer Mjolnir, and Freyr's golden ship Skidbladnir. The dwarves listened as Odin spoke of the wolf, of his strength, of the need for a bond unbreakable. They did not laugh nor scoff, for they knew well that even iron and steel are weak before the will of destiny. Instead, they nodded and retreated into the glow of their forges. Days passed, and the ringing of hammers echoed through the mountain halls. But what they shaped was no iron, no steel, no ordinary metal. Instead, they wove a ribbon smooth as silk, soft as a whisper, gleaming faintly as though touched by moonlight. This was Gleipnir, the unbreakable binding. It was forged from 6 impossible things: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. From these impossibilities the dwarves spun their ribbon, delicate yet stronger than all the chains of Midgard combined. When they placed it in Odin's hands, it seemed laughable in its lightness. But the dwarves warned, "Do not trust your eyes. This is stronger than iron, stronger than stone. With this, even destiny itself may be delayed." And so the gods returned with Gleipnir, their last hope. The gods approached Fenrir on the plain. The wolf stood tall, his black fur rippling in the wind, his eyes burning with suspicion. He had broken their chains twice already, and in his pride he no longer looked upon them as masters but as prey. "Fenrir," they called, voices careful, words laced with false cheer. "We have here a ribbon, soft and light, crafted by the dwarves. Surely this is no chain. Surely it could not bind one such as you. Will you not prove your strength once more, and show that even the softest of bonds cannot hold you?" Fenrir narrowed his eyes. His gaze swept over the gods, then fell upon the ribbon. He could smell the magic in it, faint and strange, unlike any metal he had ever broken. His lips curled back, baring teeth white as polished bone. "You mock me," he growled. "I have broken your iron, your steel. And now you bring me thread and call it challenge? No, there is trickery in this." The gods exchanged uneasy glances. They knew he was right. At last, Fenrir spoke again, his voice low and dangerous. "If you would bind me with this ribbon, then I demand a pledge. One of you must place your hand between my jaws as a token of faith. If you mean no treachery, you will not fear. If you do, then I will know it." The gods fell silent. None stepped forward. For though they wished to bind him, none had courage enough to place their hand in the maw of the wolf. Except Tyr, the god of honor, the god of oaths, the god whom Fenrir trusted above all others. He alone did not hesitate. He looked at the wolf, and in his eyes was sorrow but also resolve. "I will give my hand," Tyr said. Fenrir's gaze softened for a moment. Of all the gods, this was the one he had trusted. If Tyr offered his hand, then perhaps there was no deception. Perhaps he was wrong. And so Fenrir opened his jaws wide, wide enough that his fangs gleamed in the sunlight, wide enough that darkness seemed to spill from his mouth. Tyr placed his right hand between those jaws, resting it upon the tongue of the beast. The gods wrapped Gleipnir around Fenrir. Once, twice, thrice until the ribbon was tight. They fastened it to the rocks, drove stakes deep into the ground, and when it was done they stepped back. "Now, wolf," they said, "show your strength." Fenrir strained. His muscles bulged, the ground quaked, his breath came in great storms of heat. He twisted, he pulled, he clawed, but the ribbon did not break. It did not stretch, it did not strain. The wolf roared, his cry rolling like thunder across the sky. He heaved with all his might, tearing at the earth, but still Gleipnir held. And in that moment Fenrir knew. He knew the truth, that the gods had tricked him, that their smiles had been lies, that they had never trusted him, never wished him free. His eyes blazed with fury. His jaw snapped shut. And Tyr's hand was gone. The god did not cry out. He did not weep. He only stood, his face calm, though his arm ended now in emptiness. He had paid the price of honor, the price of loyalty betrayed. Fenrir writhed, bound and broken in spirit, his voice a terrible sound of rage and sorrow. The gods turned their faces away, for none could meet his gaze. Odin stepped forward at last. "So it is done," he said, his tone heavy with both relief and dread. "The wolf is bound. And bound he shall remain until the day of the end." But Fenrir's eyes burned brighter than ever. He lifted his head, even in chains, and spoke with a voice that chilled the blood of every god present. "You think yourselves wise. You think yourselves safe. But hear me, when the hour comes I will break these bonds. I will rise, and the sky itself will shatter at my coming. And in that day, Odin, you shall be the first I devour." And though Gleipnir held him fast, the gods could not shake the terror that his words brought. For they knew, as Odin knew, that fate is not so easily denied. When Gleipnir finally held, the meadow fell into silence. The gods stood in a wide circle, their faces pale, their breaths shallow. None dared speak, for the sound of Fenrir's rage still hung in the air, vibrating through the earth like the aftershock of a thunderclap. The wolf lay bound, his massive body straining against the ribbon that looked fragile, almost laughable, and yet held stronger than the deepest roots of the mountains. His fur bristled like a forest of spears, His eyes glowed with a fire that could have melted stone, and every breath he drew came as a growl that rumbled through the ground. Tyr stood apart, his right sleeve hanging limp, the hand that once was now gone. He did not flinch nor show weakness, but his eyes were heavy with grief. For though he had offered his hand willingly, though he had known the risk, it was not the loss of flesh that pained him. It was the betrayal, the breaking of trust between himself and the wolf who had once rested at his side beneath the stars. Fenrir's gaze fell upon him, and for a heartbeat there was silence between them, heavier than chains. In that silence, the wolf's fury was not only rage. It was sorrow, it was betrayal, it was the wound of knowing that the one bond he had believed in had been used against him. Then Fenrir turned his head and closed his eyes. He would not look at Tyr again. The gods dragged Fenrir, bound as he was, to a remote place far from the golden halls of Asgard. There they wedged the ribbon deep into the clefts of stone, fastening it with anchors driven to the roots of the earth. They forced the wolf down upon a flat rock, his body stretched against the ground, his jaws still snapping in defiance. To keep him from biting, they thrust a sword between his teeth, its hilt jammed against his upper jaw, its blade against the lower. There it stuck, forcing his mouth wide open, so that drool poured from him in rivers, forming a stream that ran into the earth below. This stream the Skalds would later call Van, the river of expectation. There he lay, bound and gagged, his head upon the stone, his body pressed into the earth, his spirit raging. The gods stepped back, their task complete. Some felt triumph. Others felt only unease. For though the wolf no longer walked among them, his presence did not vanish. It lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating, a reminder of the doom they had merely postponed. Days turned to nights, and nights into endless seasons. Fenrir remained bound. He strained against Gleipnir until the ground cracked beneath him, until the mountains shook, but the ribbon did not yield. He clawed the rock until it split, but the bond held fast. He roared to the sky, shaking the stars themselves, yet still he could not break free. And so he waited. Bound, betrayed, and silenced by the sword in his mouth, Fenrir turned inward. His thoughts grew dark as caves, heavy as storms. He remembered the meadows of Asgard, where once he had run free. He remembered the nights when Tyr sat beside him, telling stories of far-off lands. He remembered the laughter he had never shared, the distance that had always been there, the eyes of gods who had never truly seen him as one of their own. The more he remembered, the deeper his fury grew. It was not the rage of hunger, nor the fury of a beast denied prey. It was the cold, enduring wrath of betrayal, the wrath that waits, patient as winter, until the time to strike has come. In his captivity, dreams came to Fenrir, dreams that were not dreams but visions. He saw skies torn apart by fire. He saw seas boiling as Jormungandr rose from the deep, his coils breaking the waves. He saw hell marching from her underworld halls, leading an army of the dead. And he saw himself. In his visions he was vast beyond measure, his jaws stretched wide, reaching from earth to sky. He felt the snap of Gleipnir breaking at last, the taste of air free and wild in his lungs. He saw Odin the All-Father standing before him with spear in hand. And he saw himself leaping, jaws closing over the god, devouring him whole. Each time he woke, his body shook with fury, his chains quivered, the earth split around him. The gods felt it in their halls, a distant rumble, a tremor in the roots of Yggdrasil, and they knew. The wolf dreamed of the end. Even bound, Fenrir haunted them. When they feasted in Valhalla, They heard in the distance the muffled roars echoing across the realms. When they marched to war, they remembered the strength with which he had broken iron like twigs. When they looked upon Tyr's empty sleeve, they saw the price of binding him. Some comforted themselves with the thought that the wolf was chained, that he could do no harm. But Odin knew better. Fate was not so easily undone. The Norns had woven the threads, and in those threads Fenrir's role was not erased, only delayed. And so a shadow lay over Asgard, silent and heavy. The gods laughed, they drank, they fought, but beneath it all was the knowledge that far away, bound upon a rock, a wolf waited. And his waiting was not idle. His waiting was destiny. Time in captivity passed differently for Fenrir. To mortals, a single season was long. To gods, a century was brief. But to the wolf, bound upon the rock with Gleipnir cutting into his flesh, every heartbeat stretched into eternity. The sun rose and set, casting its light upon his unmoving body. The moon waxed and waned, silvering his fur with its glow. The stars wheeled above him in their endless dance, but for Fenrir there was no movement, no freedom, no escape. Only the ceaseless weight of waiting. His muscles strained until they ached, his claws dug furrows into the stone, his throat burned from the growls he forced past the sword wedged in his mouth. But no matter how he struggled, no matter how his rage thundered, Gleipnir did not yield. It held, smooth and light as silk, yet strong as the will of fate itself. And so Fenrir lay, his fury like a fire that never burned out, smoldering beneath the surface, hotter with every passing year. What cut deeper than chains was solitude. In Asgard there had always been distance between him and the other gods, but at least there had been Tyr, a hand upon his head, a voice in the night, a presence that made the vastness of the world less cold. Now there was nothing. The gods no longer came to see him. They had done what they intended. They had bound him, silenced him, cast him aside. They turned their faces away, preferring to pretend that the wolf no longer existed. Only Tyr sometimes came, his steps heavy, his eyes sorrowful. He said little, for what words could mend a wound carved by betrayal? But still he came, and for that, Fenrir's fury was tempered by something quieter, something almost like grief. But as years rolled into centuries, even Tyr's visits grew rare. The wolf was left alone with the sound of the wind, the trickle of his own drool forming the river Van, and the beat of his own heart. In solitude his mind sharpened. He turned inward, recalling every slight, every glance of suspicion, every whisper of fear that had ever followed him. He remembered the warmth of trust and the cold of its betrayal. And slowly a truth rooted itself in him. He was never meant to be part of them. Never meant to be embraced as one of Asgard's own. He was set apart from the beginning, born not to belong but to bring an ending. Dreams haunted Fenrir's long captivity. He saw the sea boiling and churning as his brother Jormungandr stirred beneath the waves. He felt the serpent's coils pressing against the shores of Midgard, encircling the world. He saw his sister Hel seated upon her throne, her one half-living face calm, the other corpse-like and still, as she marshaled the dead in her shadowed halls. Most of all he saw himself. He dreamed of the moment the ribbon would snap, of the wild joy of freedom rushing back into his veins. He dreamed of the sky darkening as he howled, of mountains crumbling beneath his paws, of gods scattering before him like frightened deer. He dreamed of Odin. Always Odin. The one-eyed god, the father of all, the one who had ordered his binding. In vision after vision, Fenrir leapt upon him, his jaws closing, the taste of blood and godhood upon his tongue. When he woke from these dreams he struggled harder, straining until the earth shook. But Gleipnir held. It always held. Though the gods turned their gaze away, mortals in Midgard whispered of the bound wolf. Hunters spoke of nights when the wind carried a low growl across the forests, deep and distant, yet so powerful it made their bones ache. Sailors told of seeing the sea ripple, as if stirred by some vast and restless breath beneath the waves, and they said it was Fenrir sighing in his bonds. Farmers claimed their cattle grew restless on nights when the moon shone red, as though the wolf's anger reached even into their fields. Skalds sang of him by firelight, their voices low, their listeners leaning close. They told of the wolf who would one day break free, who would devour gods, who would swallow the sun. They spoke his name not with reverence but with awe and fear, for even bound he was not forgotten. And so his legend spread across the 9 realms, carried in stories, in whispers, in dreams. Bound though he was, Fenrir remained present in every hearth, in every shadow, in every prophecy. In Asgard life continued. The gods feasted in their golden halls, fought battles, drank mead, and welcomed the souls of warriors into Valhalla. They laughed loudly, but beneath their laughter lay the unease of knowing that far away, the wolf still waited. Sometimes when a distant tremor shook the ground, they knew it was him testing his chains. Sometimes when they saw Tyr's empty sleeve, they remembered the price of binding him. And sometimes when Odin sat silent upon his throne, lost in visions, they wondered if he heard the wolf's growl echoing in the deep fabric of fate. They told themselves they were safe, that Gleipnir would hold until the end of days. But in their hearts they knew. The wolf was not defeated. He was not gone. He was only waiting. And waiting can be more terrible than action. Time pressed upon Fenrir like a second chain, heavier even than Gleipnir. Days bled into nights, nights into years, years into centuries, until the wolf could no longer tell whether the sun had risen 100 times or 1,000. His body remained mighty, his spirit fierce, but the endless sameness of his captivity gnawed at him like rust upon steel. At first he fought constantly, straining against the ribbon until his muscles tore and the earth cracked beneath him. But soon he learned that no matter how he pulled, no matter how he clawed, Gleipnir held. It did not creak, it did not fray. It mocked him with its softness, with its lightness, as though to say, "Your strength means nothing here." And so his struggle became not only physical, but inward. The greatest battle he fought was against despair. Of all the torments that filled his long captivity, none cut so deep as the memory of Tyr. Tyr, the one god he had trusted. Tyr, who had placed food in his jaws when he was young, who had spoken to him in the quiet of night, who had been more companion than jailer. Tyr, who had promised with his presence that perhaps the wolf was not utterly alone. And yet it was Tyr's hand he had taken when the truth of the god's betrayal came crashing down. Tyr's hand that had been offered, not as loyalty but as a price. Fenrir remembered the moment his jaws closed. He remembered the taste of blood, the sound of bones snapping. And though he had not chosen it, though it was forced upon him, the memory burned. It was not triumph. It was sorrow. In his darkest hours, the wolf wondered if he hated Tyr most of all, or if some part of him still mourned the bond that had been lost. Bound in silence, Fenrir's thoughts stretched outward, filling the emptiness. He imagined running once more across the meadows of Asgard, his paws striking the earth in thunderous rhythm. He imagined tearing through the forests of Midgard, his howl scattering flocks of birds into the sky. Sometimes his mind wandered further still. He imagined a world after the end, after Ragnarok, when the chains were gone, the gods were fallen, and the skies were open. He imagined himself roaming freely, no longer a prisoner but a king of wildness, a lord of untamed power. These dreams sustained him as much as they tormented him. They were glimpses of what he was denied, promises that whispered, "Wait. The time will come." In Midgard, his story grew with every passing generation. Children were warned at night, "Do not wander far or Fenrir will hear you." Warriors invoked his name before battle, daring to claim that their ferocity was like the wolf bound in Asgard. Kings dreamed of him, and in their dreams they saw their own doom reflected in his burning eyes. The skalds wove songs of him, their voices carrying across longhouses as firelight flickered upon the walls. They sang of the wolf who would devour the sun, whose chains would one day snap, whose rage would bring the sky crashing down. Even in chains, Fenrir lived among them. In their fears, in their stories, in their very breath. But in Asgard the All-Father knew more. Odin's nights were restless. He sat upon his throne, Gungnir at his side, ravens upon his shoulders. His one eye gazed not into the hall before him, but into what lay ahead. And what he saw was always the same. He saw Fenrir, vast and unstoppable, snapping Gleipnir as though it were cobweb. He saw the wolf's jaws open so wide they scraped the sky and the earth at once. He saw himself, Odin, father of all, swallowed whole, consumed in darkness. And though Odin was a god of wisdom, though he had sacrificed his eye for knowledge, though he had hung upon Yggdrasil itself to seize the runes of fate, still he could not change what was woven. The wolf would rise. Odin would fall. This knowledge gnawed at him as surely as the chains gnawed at Fenrir. Every victory tasted of ashes, every triumph rang hollow. For what is the worth of glory, when doom waits with its jaws already open? And so the world turned. Fenrir lay bound, his fury contained but never quenched. The gods feasted, fought, and ruled, yet lived beneath the shadow of their own dread. Mortals whispered his name into the night, both fearfully and with awe. The wolf waited. The gods waited. The very fabric of the 9 realms seemed to wait. All knew the truth, though few dared speak it. Fenrir was not defeated. He was only delayed. And when the day came, when the sky darkened and the earth shook, his chains would snap, and his howl would be the herald of the world's end. Though bound, Fenrir was not silent. His roars, his growls, his howls, all rolled across the 9 realms like storms. When he strained against Gleipnir, the mountains groaned. When he bared his teeth against the sword that held his jaws apart, lightning flickered across the sky. When he howled, long and mournful, the sound carried into Midgard, shaking the hearts of men and beasts alike. There were nights when thunder cracked without rain, when the wind howled through the forests so fiercely that even the wolves of Midgard fell silent. And mortals would whisper, "The chained one cries out. The great wolf stirs." Fenrir had become more than a beast. He was a force of nature, as inseparable from the world as storms and fire. But not all wolves fled from his voice. In Midgard, when Fenrir howled, the wolves of the forests lifted their heads and answered. Packs gathered, their voices rising into the night sky, forming a chorus that echoed across valleys and fjords. It was as though they knew deep in their blood that the chained wolf was kin, that his strength was their strength, his fate their fate. Hunters spoke of strange gatherings, of hundreds of wolves assembled beneath the moon, eyes gleaming, voices joined in one endless cry. And when these howls faded, the forests lay heavy with silence, as if waiting for something vast to come. The mortals feared these knights, for they believed Fenrir was calling to his kindred, and that one day, all wolves would run with him when the chains broke. The Norns, who wove the threads of fate at the roots of Yggdrasil, did not speak openly of the wolf, but their silence was its own omen. For those who sought their counsel were given visions of shadows spreading across the sky, of suns swallowed, of gods brought low. And though the Norns said little, their eyes flicked always toward the same place, the rock where Fenrir lay bound. Other omens appeared in the realms. A raven fell dead from the sky, and the wise said it was because it flew too near the wolf's bound spirit. A mountain cracked with no quake, and some claimed it was Fenrir straining in his sleep. Fish swam to the surface of the sea, gasping as though even the waters felt the weight of his fury. Each sign whispered the same truth. Gleipnir held, but the wolf's presence could not be contained. Among mortals there arose prophets who spoke of Fenrir in riddles. They said, "When the wolf's breath turns the air to frost, the world will shiver." They said, "When the wolf's drool becomes a river, men will march to war." They said, "When the wolf breaks his chain, the stars themselves will fall." Some feared these words. Others welcomed them, believing that the end he would bring was not only death, but rebirth. That through his jaws the world would be remade. And so Fenrir became not only a beast of dread, but a figure of strange hope, for in his fury lay the promise of change. In Asgard the gods heard these whispers and they grew uneasy. They drank deeper, laughed louder, fought harder, as though to drown out the sound of the wolf's distant roars. But the shadow never left them. For each time they raised their cups in triumph, they remembered the rock, the ribbon, and the jaws that had snapped Tyr's hand. And Odin, sitting upon his throne, knew what the others denied, that the wolf's chains were not forever. That every creak of the earth, every storm that rolled across the 9 realms, was a reminder that destiny was only biding its time. Fenrir was not defeated. He was waiting. And waiting is the sharpest blade of all. Bound upon the rock, Fenrir no longer strained against Gleipnir with the same blind fury he once had. The ribbon mocked his strength, yes, but over time he learned that his power was not wasted in silence. His thoughts sharpened, honed by solitude. In the stillness he spoke to himself. Not with words as men and gods speak, but with the language of will, the language of the soul. They feared me from the beginning. They smiled at me but their eyes betrayed them. They bound me not because of what I did, but because of what I will do. These words became his heartbeat, a steady rhythm pulsing through his vast body. He understood now that his fate had been chosen before his first howl. He was not chained for his crimes. He was chained for his destiny. And though rage still burned in him, another fire took shape: patience. If the Norns had woven his role into the tapestry of existence, then no chain, no sword, no god could erase it. His time would come. In his solitude, Fenrir felt the distant presence of his kin. Hel, his sister, ruled the underworld. He could not see her halls, but sometimes when the air grew still, he sensed her gaze. Cold, calm, unyielding. She was half life, half death, and her kingdom echoed that balance. He felt her strength not in fury but in silence, the endless silence of the grave. Jormungandr, his brother, writhed in the depths of the sea. Fenrir sometimes dreamed of salt upon his tongue, of waves crashing as if struck by a tail vast enough to churn oceans. In his visions he felt the serpent's body coiled tighter and tighter around Midgard, a living chain encircling the world. They were apart and yet not apart. Born of the same blood, touched by the same destiny, each was trapped in their own prison. Hel in her cold realm, Jormungandr in the endless sea, Fenrir in his bonds. And though they could not meet, he knew that when the end came, they would rise together. This thought comforted him in the dark. He was not alone. The blood of chaos flowed in more than his own veins. In Asgard, the wolf's silence did not bring peace. If anything, it unnerved the gods more than his roars. They remembered when he howled at the sky, when he strained against his bonds with fury that shook the mountains. Now he lay quiet, his eyes closed more often than open, his breath steady as a drumbeat. "What does he plot?" whispered Freya. "Why does he no longer rage?" "He waits," Odin said, his voice low. "He waits because he knows." The gods shivered. They could not decide which was worse, a wolf that strained endlessly against his bonds or a wolf that simply waited. In Midgard, the legend of the wolf grew ever more vivid. Skalds no longer spoke of him only as a beast of doom, but as a figure of inevitability. They told of his patience, his silence, his waiting. They said, "The wolf does not waste his strength. He keeps it within, and one day he will spend it all in a single moment." Farmers pointed to cracks in their fields and said they were made by the wolf's breath. Sailors who survived storms swore they had heard his growl beneath the thunder. Children whispered his name to frighten one another, daring each other to call to him in the night. Fenrir had become more than a prisoner. He had become a myth alive, a presence that no chain could contain. Even bound, he roamed the minds of gods and men alike. Odin alone carried the full weight of what was to come. His visions showed him not only the wolf's fury, but the exact moment of his own death. He saw again and again the jaws closing, the darkness falling, the end of his breath within Fenrir's maw. He told no one the full truth. For what use was it to share? The gods would only despair. Better to let them cling to the illusion that the wolf was contained, that the bonds would last forever. But Odin knew. Every silence from Fenrir was a step closer to the end. Every storm, every howl of wolves in Midgard, every whisper of mortals, all were threads weaving toward the same tapestry. The All-Father drank deeply of mead, sought wisdom from every corner of the realms, hung upon the tree of Yggdrasil itself. Yet nothing could change what was woven. And in the stillness of night, even Odin felt a chill when he thought of the wolf waiting in silence, eyes burning like embers in the dark. The story of Fenrir might have ended the day the gods bound him. His jaws forced open, his body pressed into the rock, his strength mocked by a ribbon spun from impossible things. The gods left him there, chained and silenced, and they returned to their golden halls with laughter on their lips and triumph in their hearts. But the story did not end. For stories do not end with silence. They linger. They grow. They weave themselves into the lives of all who hear them. And Fenrir, bound though he was, became more than a wolf, more than a prisoner. He became a shadow cast across the 9 realms. The wolf waited. The wolf dreamed. The wolf endured. And in that endurance, destiny ripened. In Asgard, the gods tried to live as though nothing had changed. They feasted in their halls, raised their cups, clashed in battles and tournaments, and sang of victories yet to come. But beneath the revelry was unease. Every clang of a goblet, every roar of laughter, seemed to echo with a hollow note. For always in the back of their minds was the image of the wolf, eyes burning, body bound, prophecy unbroken. They told themselves they had won. They told themselves Gleipnir was unbreakable. Yet not even gods could escape the weight of fear. For they knew what Odin knew, even if they did not admit it aloud. The wolf was not defeated. He was only delayed. And delay is not the same as victory. In Midgard, where men lived brief lives measured by the turn of seasons, the story of Fenrir grew ever more powerful. Skalds sang not only of the day he would break free, but of the silence of his waiting. They said, "He is patient where we are not. He endures what we cannot. He is strength in chains, power in silence, fire banked until the right hour." Children fell asleep to warnings. Stay close to the fire, lest the wolf's breath find you in the dark. Hunters, hearing wolves howl in the forest, shivered at the thought that their cries echoed the voice of the bound one. Even kings dreamt of him. In their visions their crowns melted, their thrones shattered, and a pair of burning eyes looked down upon them from the sky. Fenrir had become not only a creature of fate, but a figure that haunted the very imagination of mankind. Though bound, Fenrir was not alone in his destiny. His siblings, Hel and Jormungandr, each lived their roles in shadow. Hel ruled her underworld halls, silent and patient, half maiden, half corpse. Mortals who died not in battle but of age or sickness found themselves beneath her gaze, and in her eyes they read the same inevitability that shone in her brothers. Jormungandr writhed in the seas, circling Midgard with a body so vast it touched its own tail. Fishermen spoke of waves that rose without wind, of shadows beneath the waters that stretched for miles. He too was waiting, coiled, patient, inevitable. Fenrir felt them both. Though no chain could be heavier than his own, he sensed their weight, their prisons. They were three children of Loki, three forces bound and hidden. And yet, deep within he knew, one day they would rise together, and above all Odin watched. The All-Father, who had hung upon Yggdrasil for 9 nights, who had given his eye for wisdom, who had learned the runes from the depths of suffering, even he could not bear the sight of the wolf without unease. He saw Fenrir not only as he was, but as he would be. He saw the jaws snapping Gleipnir like thread, the sky darkening with his howl, his own death reflected in burning eyes. Odin did not speak of this often. The gods did not ask. But when his gaze lingered too long into the distance, when his voice faltered in the middle of council, when he sat alone in the quiet of the night with his ravens upon his shoulders, they knew what haunted him. It was not only the wolf's strength that frightened Odin. It was the certainty of his fate. For what greater terror exists than to know the exact moment of one's own death, and to be powerless to turn it aside? Thus the name of Fenrir became more than a creature's name. It became a symbol. In the halls of Asgard, it was spoken with caution. In the villages of Midgard, it was whispered in awe. In the visions of Odin, it was a shadow that grew longer with each passing year. He was bound, yes. But chains are not the end of a story. Chains are only the pause before it begins again. And so the wolf lay upon his rock, Gleipnir biting into his flesh, a sword forcing his jaws apart. He could not move. He could not run. He could not hunt. But he could wait. And waiting too is power. For a beast of such strength, chains were not the greatest torment. It was time. Gleipnir held him fast, yes, biting into his fur, unyielding against every pull of his muscles. But it was the passing of days, the endless repetition of dawn and dusk, that gnawed at him more fiercely than any ribbon. The sun rose. The sun fell. The moon climbed the sky, then sank into the sea. Seasons turned, snow blanketed the earth, melted and gave way to green. Birds nested, sang and died, their descendants repeating the same songs. And still the wolf lay bound. Centuries to mortals passed like heartbeats to him. Yet even for one so vast, so mighty, the monotony of eternity was heavy. Each moment dragged, stretching into a silence that weighed upon him more than stone. Time itself became his jailer, as unbreakable as Gleipnir. When Fenrir closed his eyes, he saw again the day of betrayal. He remembered Tyr's hand resting upon his tongue, warm and steady. He remembered the ribbon's deceptive softness, the false cheer in the gods' voices, the circle of their eyes upon him. He remembered the moment he knew the truth. The snap of realization had been louder in his soul than the snap of any chain. And then the closing of his jaws. The taste of blood. The silence that followed. That wound was deeper than Gleipnir's bite. For it was not only his body that was bound but his trust. Once he had believed Tyr's loyalty to be real. Once he had thought that perhaps in the world of gods he was not entirely alone. That belief had died on the plane of his binding, and its corpse rotted in his heart. Now he trusted nothing but himself. In the stillness of his captivity, Fenrir's mind was a storm. He imagined tearing free, his paws shaking the mountains, his jaws opening wide to devour the sun itself. He saw Odin's face, calm, one-eyed, ever watchful, and he dreamed of the moment when that face would vanish into darkness within his throat. He imagined running once more, the wind against his fur, the forests of Midgard trembling at his passing, the seas parting as he leapt across them. He imagined wolves by his side, thousands of them answering his call, their howls lifting the world into terror. Yet there were other thoughts too, softer, more haunting. He remembered his youth, playing in the meadows of Asgard, chasing shadows in the grass, resting his head against Tyr's knee beneath the stars. He remembered a time before suspicion, before betrayal. A time when he had been only a pup, filled with hunger and wonder. These memories cut sharper than chains, for they reminded him of what he had lost. In Asgard, the gods grew uneasy at his quiet. When he had strained, when he had howled, when he had raged, they at least knew what he was. His fury was a storm they could hear, a force they could watch. But now, bound in silence, he became something worse, unknowable. "Why does he no longer struggle?" asked Freya. "Because he waits," Odin answered. The others shifted uneasily. A wolf that rages may be feared. But a wolf that waits, that is a terror deeper still. And in truth, Fenrir did not sleep as mortals or gods sleep. His dreams were not escape but prophecy. He dreamed of his brother, the serpent, rising from the waves, venom dripping from his fangs as he faced Thor in battle. He dreamed of his sister, her half-dead face impassive as she loosed armies of the dead across the fields of men. And always, always he dreamed of himself, chains shattering, jaws stretching from earth to sky, Odin swallowed in darkness. These dreams were not fantasies. They were memories of the future. And each time he woke, his patience grew. For patience is its own kind of strength. Though Fenrir's body lay still upon the stone, the world itself seemed to echo his presence. When he stirred in his dreams, storms rose suddenly over the seas, waves crashing against the coasts of Midgard with no warning. When his muscles tensed against Gleipnir, mountains trembled, sending rocks tumbling into valleys. When he growled in his sleep, thunder rolled across the sky, even beneath a cloudless moon. The wolf's fury seeped into the veins of the earth, into the currents of the sea, into the very winds of the sky. He was not only a prisoner of chains. He was a prisoner whose wrath reached through the 9 realms, a shadow that touched everything alive. And the living felt it. In Midgard, mortals spoke often of strange signs. Cattle grew restless in their stalls, stamping and bellowing on nights when the moon turned red. Crops withered in fields though the rains had been kind, as if the soil itself trembled beneath an unseen weight. Wolves gathered in great numbers, howling together with voices that seemed to echo a deeper, more terrible howl. Farmers whispered of a river whose waters ran strangely warm in winter. Sailors swore that the sea sometimes foamed as though a great body moved beneath it, though no serpent was in sight. Mothers hushed their children, warning them that the great wolf's dreams reached even into their homes. The wise men and women of Midgard knew these were omens. They spoke of the bound wolf, his fury seeping into the world, his patience filling the air. They said, "The wolf does not sleep. He waits, and in his waiting the world shivers." In Asgard the gods pretended to celebrate. They raised golden cups in Valhalla, feasted with warriors and sang of battles past. But beneath their laughter was tension, sharp and unspoken. Thor, whose hammer had shattered mountains, grew restless, his hand always near Mjolnir. He had faced giants, serpents, and storms, but the thought of the wolf gnawed at him, for he knew his strength would one day be tested against fate itself. Freya, goddess of beauty and battle, heard the cries of wolves in the night and felt a chill, as though each howl was a thread tugging at the fabric of destiny. Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, heard the faintest sounds across the realms. And even he admitted that sometimes, when all else was quiet, he could hear the slow, steady breath of the chained wolf, echoing in the silence between worlds. Odin alone knew most clearly what the omens meant. His one eye had seen into the well of Mimir, and he had glimpsed the unalterable flow of fate. He saw that every storm, every crack in the mountains, every trembling of the sea, was not chance. They were reminders. The wolf was bound, but fate was not. And in Odin's mind, the image of his own end grew sharper with each passing year. The wolf, jaws wide, rushing toward him. The snap of Gleipnir was already echoing in his ears, though it had not yet broken. The All-Father hid his dread behind wisdom, behind laughter, behind endless plans. Yet in the stillness of night, when even the ravens upon his shoulders slept, he could not escape it. Meanwhile Fenrir endured. He did not rage as he once had. He did not waste his strength upon chains that would not break. Instead he lay silent, his eyes glowing in the dark, his breath steady as tides. And yet within him his power grew. His body remained bound, but his spirit stretched outward, touching forests, seas, skies, and the hearts of men. The wolf was no longer only a beast upon a rock. He had become a force that lived in the air itself, a promise of what would come. And all who lived, gods, giants, men, beasts, felt it even if they could not name it. The wolf waited, and waiting the world trembled. Though bound, Fenrir's eyes burned with fire, and in their glow lay visions. When he closed them, he did not see only darkness. He saw what was coming, the end of all things. He saw the seas boiling, great waves torn apart by the thrashing of his brother Jormungandr. He saw Thor, hammer raised, facing the serpent, lightning flashing around him as venom darkened the sky. He saw Hel, half maiden and half corpse, her cold eyes steady as she marched from her realm, leading the dead in a tide that drowned battlefields. And he saw himself, Gleipnir shattered, the sword that held his jaws cast aside, his roar tearing the heavens apart, his steps breaking the earth, his jaws wide enough to swallow the sun. He saw Odin standing before him, spear in hand, ravens circling. And then he saw the moment that would echo forever, the leap, the jaws, the darkness. Again and again he dreamed it. Again and again he woke, his chains trembling, the rock beneath him splitting. His visions were not hope. They were certainty. They were the future pressing upon the present. In Midgard, his story was more than a tale. It became prophecy. Seers spoke of him in riddles, their voices rising in longhouses while warriors and farmers leaned close to listen. They said, "When the wolf's breath turns the air to frost, winter without end shall fall. When the wolf's eyes burn brighter than the sun, the sky itself will shatter. When the wolf opens his jaws, the gods shall tremble and the world shall be remade." Villages lit fires at night, not only for warmth, but to keep his shadow at bay. Some carved charms of wolves not to ward him off but to honor him, believing that if they showed respect, the great wolf might spare them when the end came. There were even those who prayed to him in secret, whispering into the dark, "Wolf of fate, remember us when the chains break. Carry us with you into the new world." Thus his legend grew not only as fear but as faith. In Asgard, his silence was a wound that festered. Some gods grew restless. Thor clenched Mjolnir tighter, muttering that they should have slain the wolf when he was still small enough to kill. Why bind him if we know he will one day rise? Why not strike now and be rid of him forever? But others shook their heads. Frigg, wise in foresight, warned, "You cannot cut what is woven. His death is written only in one way, and if you seek another, you may bring the end sooner than it must be." Heimdall stood watch at the Bifrost, ever alert, yet even he admitted the wolf's silence weighed heavier than his roars. "It is not the storm that terrifies me," he confessed, "but the calm before it." And Odin said little. But in his one eye shone a knowledge the others dreaded, that Thor's strength, Frigg's wisdom, Heimdall's vigilance, none of it would matter. The wolf would rise. He had seen it. He had felt it in every whisper of the Norns. Fenrir meanwhile waited. He did not waste his strength upon Gleipnir. He did not thrash as once he had. Instead, he lay in silence, his breath slow, his eyes half closed as though he were sleeping. But within, his vision sharpened. His power coiled tighter. His patience grew deeper. The gods mistook this patience for defeat. But patience is not surrender. Patience is a blade sharpening itself upon silence. And Fenrir's silence was sharper than steel. The wolf was bound, but the sky above bore witness to his fate. There were nights when the moon turned red as blood, glowing like an ember suspended in the heavens. The people of Midgard whispered that Fenrir had brushed it with his breath, his chained fury staining its silver face. There were days when the sun dimmed without warning, shadowed by clouds that had not gathered, eclipsed by a darkness that came from nowhere. In those moments, mortals fell to their knees, praying to gods or whispering to the wolf himself. For they knew, when Fenrir rose, the sun would vanish forever into his jaws. Even the stars seemed restless. Constellations shifted subtly, as though the very pattern of the heavens was uneasy, tugged by the wolf's slow and patient power. The sky, like the earth, trembled in expectation. More dreadful than storms, more feared than eclipses, was the omen of winter. Seers in Midgard spoke of a day when Fenrir's breath would spread across the world, chilling the air so deeply that snow would never melt. They called it Fimbulwinter, the great winter that would precede the end. 3 years of unbroken frost. 3 years without summer's warmth. 3 years of hunger, of strife, of blood. And in that endless winter they said the wolf would stir. His chains would tremble, his fury would sharpen, and the 9 realms would collapse beneath the weight of his rising. So each harsh winter reminded men of his coming. Each storm, each frozen field, was taken as a whisper from the wolf, a promise that the end crept closer. Fenrir was not alone in fate. His siblings too carried the mark of doom. Hel sat upon her throne in the underworld, half her face alive, the other half a corpse. Her realm was filled with those who had died not in valor but in weakness, the sick, the aged, the forgotten. Yet she ruled them not with cruelty but with silence. Her power was patience, her strength inevitability. And in her cold calm Fenrir felt kinship. Jormungandr, the serpent, circled Midgard in coils so vast they pressed against the shores. He grew larger each year, and his venom seeped into the waters, poisoning fish and filling sailors' dreams with terror. Fenrir felt his brother's movement in the tides of his visions, a slow constriction, a tightening no man could escape. They were 3 children of Loki scattered across the realms, each bound in their own way. Yet they were connected. Each felt the pulse of the others. Each carried within them a fragment of the same storm. And when the day of breaking came, they would rise together. Odin knew this truth better than any. The All-Father did not sleep easily. His ravens brought him news of omens, his dreams showed him visions of Ragnarok, and his wisdom told him no trick, no chain, no spear could prevent what was coming. Yet still he sought. He traveled in secret to Mimir's well, drinking again of its waters to strengthen his foresight. He sacrificed at hidden altars, whispering runes into the bark of Yggdrasil. He summoned the Norns, pressing them for secrets, though they only wove in silence and gave him no answer. He gathered weapons, forged alliances, summoned warriors to Valhalla to prepare for the final battle. Yet all the while he knew, these were preparations not for victory but for delay. For in every vision, no matter how many paths he traced, the wolf's jaws awaited him. Meanwhile Fenrir lay still. His body bound, his jaws forced open by the sword, yet his spirit calm. He no longer fought. He no longer raged. He simply waited. But his waiting was not emptiness. It was certainty. He knew that the sun would darken. He knew that the winter would come. He knew that his siblings would rise, and that his chains would snap. And above all, he knew that Odin, the father of all, would meet his end between his teeth. This knowledge was his comfort, his strength, his fire in the endless night of captivity. For while the gods lived in fear of tomorrow, Fenrir lived in the certainty of it. Though the wolf lay bound upon his stone, his presence divided all who lived in the 9 realms. Among mortals, some trembled at his name, cursing him as the devourer, the shadow that would one day swallow sun and sky. To them, Fenrir was a terror to be feared, an omen to be warded off with charms, with offerings, with whispered prayers to the gods. But others looked upon his story differently. They saw in him not only destruction but renewal. They believed that when the wolf broke free, he would tear apart a world grown weary, and in the ashes something new would bloom. To them he was not only the end, he was the promise of beginning. Thus, around firesides in Midgard, the name of Fenrir was spoken with both dread and reverence. Children shivered when they heard it, warriors muttered it before battle, and seers carved it into runes as both warning and prophecy. Some men sought to guard themselves against him. They burned offerings of meat upon stones, hoping the smoke would rise to the bound wolf's nostrils and soothe his hunger. They left bowls of blood at the edges of forests, whispering, "Spare us when your jaws are free." Others honored him more boldly. They painted their shields with the image of the wolf's head, believing his ferocity would live within them. They howled into the night before setting sail, calling upon his strength to guide them across stormy seas. In hidden places some even built shrines to him, not to Odin, not to Thor, but to the wolf himself. They lit fires, chanted his name, and prayed not for safety but for his coming. To them the end he brought was no curse. It was destiny. In Asgard, the wolf's legend spread in whispers too, though no god would admit it aloud. They drank mead, they feasted, they fought, but always in the back of their minds, there was the thought of Fenrir lying bound upon his rock. His silence haunted them more than his roars ever had. Thor muttered that he should have struck the wolf down in his youth before the chains. Heimdall kept his ears sharp, straining always to hear the faintest tremor that might signal Gleipnir's breaking. Frigg wept quietly when she saw Odin's faraway gaze, for she knew what he foresaw. Even the halls of Valhalla, filled with endless laughter and the clashing of warriors, seemed colder with the wolf's shadow looming over them. For what good was glory if it all ended in jaws? And what of Fenrir himself? Bound upon the stone, sword prying his jaws apart, Gleipnir biting into his fur, the wolf turned inward. His body was trapped, but his mind roamed free. He thought of the meadows where he once played. He thought of Tyr, the god whose hand he had taken, and wondered if some part of that bond still lingered in the air between them. He thought of his siblings, Hel in her cold halls, Jormungandr in his endless coils, and he felt the pull of their fates entwined with his. He thought most of all of Odin. Always Odin. The image of the one-eyed god returned to him in every vision, in every dream. Not as a torment but as a certainty. It was not hatred alone that filled him. It was destiny itself, written so deeply into his being that it burned brighter than rage. And so he waited. And waiting he grew. Not in body but in spirit, in patience, in certainty. The 9 realms lived their lives. Mortals tilled their fields, gods drank their mead, giants plotted in Jotunheim, dwarves forged in their caverns. And yet, across them all, there was the same hush, the same undercurrent, the wolf's shadow. It stretched further than chains, further than rocks, further than the ribbon Gleipnir. It was in the trembling of the earth, in the whisper of seers, in the silence of Odin's gaze. All the world was waiting, though most did not know it. Waiting for the moment when silence would break, when patience would end, when the wolf would rise. Fenrir was not alone in the shaping of doom. He was one of 3 born of Loki and Angerboda, each marked by strangeness, each destined to change the world. Hel, his sister, ruled the realm of the dead. Cast down by Odin, she dwelled in halls of mist and shadow, half her body alive, the other half pale and lifeless. She was queen of those who had not died in valor, of those who slipped away in sickness, in age, in quiet sorrow. Mortals feared her, yet none could deny her power. She ruled not with fury but with certainty, for all who lived must one day walk her halls. Jormungandr, his brother, lived in the sea. Thrown into the waters by the gods, he grew until his coils circled Midgard itself, his body so vast he could bite his own tail. His venom seeped into the ocean, poisoning fish, darkening waves, twisting storms into chaos. Sailors spoke of glimpsing his shadow beneath their ships, stretching like a mountain in motion. 3 children, 3 fates. Each cast aside, each bound. Hel to her realm, Jormungandr to the sea, Fenrir to his chains. Each growing, waiting, biding their time. Though scattered, they were not apart. Fenrir felt them in his blood, like distant heartbeats echoing across realms. In dreams he saw Hel's cold gaze, patient and unblinking, her legions of the dead marching in silence. In visions he felt the coil of Jormungandr, tightening around the world like a chain of living flesh. They too waited. Each in their prison, each denied freedom, each carrying the same inevitability, that when the end came they would rise together. It was not only his fate Fenrir dreamed of. It was theirs. He saw Hel unleashing her armies, Jormungandr vomiting venom into the skies, and himself breaking his bonds. 3 children of Angerboda, 3 shadows of Loki, 3 storms crashing at once. And the world would not withstand them. The 9 realms held in a delicate balance, each bound to Yggdrasil, the great world tree. But beneath the roots, the Norns wove their tapestry, and in the weaving, there were knots, dark, heavy knots that grew with each passing year. The gods ignored them at first. They told themselves the wolf was bound, the serpent confined, the queen of the dead sealed away. But they felt the imbalance nonetheless. The sea grew more violent, storms thrashing ships and swallowing fleets. The underworld grew more restless, the dead whispering in dreams, their voices spilling into the minds of the living. The earth itself grew uneasy, trembling with small quakes, as though something vast shifted in its sleep. It was not only Fenrir who waited. The very fabric of the 9 realms waited with him. Prophecies multiplied. In Midgard, seers carved runes into stones, warning of wolves at the gates of the sun. In Jotunheim, giants spoke of oceans boiling, of venom raining from the sky. Even in Asgard, whispers spread among the Valkyries, who flew across battlefields to choose the slain. They said the songs of warriors now carried not only of glory but of doom. The gods denied it aloud. But in secret they argued. Perhaps, muttered Thor, we should strike the serpent in the sea before it grows larger still. And perhaps we should march upon Hel's halls before her dead can march upon us, said another. But Odin shook his head. His voice was low, heavy, final. No. Fate cannot be cut. The wolf, the serpent, the queen of shadows, they are written into the end. Strike them and the end will come sooner. And so they waited uneasily as Fenrir did. On his stone, Gleipnir biting into his flesh, Fenrir closed his eyes and dreamed. He dreamed of his sister's halls, cold and vast, filled with the dead who did not weep, who did not laugh, but who marched at her silent command. He dreamed of his brother's coils tightening until the world groaned, until the seas themselves begged for release. And in these dreams he did not feel alone. He felt the blood of Angerboda binding them together. He felt the fire of Loki in their veins, a trickster's laughter turned to destiny. He felt that when his chains snapped, the earth would not hear only his roar, it would hear 3 voices rising as one. The wolf's eyes opened. He did not struggle. He did not rage. He only waited. For waiting was no longer solitude. Waiting was kinship. Waiting was power. The seers of Midgard had long spoken of a winter that would never end. Not one of snow alone, but of silence, of hunger, of despair. They named it Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter, a chill that would cover the world for 3 unbroken years. No spring. No summer. No reprieve. Only frost creeping over fields, rivers frozen into silence, and skies that never warmed. And though the great winter had not yet come, its shadow already loomed. Farmers looked uneasily upon their crops, for sometimes frost fell even in the height of summer. Hunters returned from the woods with less game, whispering that the animals themselves fled some unseen terror. The seas froze earlier each year, swallowing ships in their icy grip. Mortals saw these signs and shuddered. They knew whose breath carried in that cold. They whispered, the wolf exhales. The wolf waits. The wolf promises. In villages across Midgard, rituals multiplied. When snow came early, people lit great bonfires, not only to warm themselves, but to ward off the wolf's shadow. They believed that flames were prayers, that each spark was a plea for Fenrir's hunger to turn aside. Some carved wolf heads into their doors, believing that honoring his image might make him see them as kin rather than prey. Warriors painted his eyes upon their shields, declaring that if they must die in his jaws, they would at least die bravely. In the far north, where the night stretched long, certain tribes even howled at the moon together, raising their voices in chorus with wolves in the forests. They said they were not resisting him, but calling to him, offering themselves as allies when his chains broke. Thus mortals divided themselves. Some resisted, some feared, some embraced. But none ignored him. In Asgard, the omens could no longer be dismissed. Snow fell on golden fields where no snow should be. Wolves howled at the edges of the realm, their voices carrying into the very halls of the gods. The flames in the great hearths sputtered strangely, as though a cold breath sought to extinguish them. Thor muttered curses into his beard, striking sparks from Mjolnir as if to drive away the chill. Freya stood in silence, her eyes turned toward the horizon, lips pressed tight. Heimdall, ever listening, swore he could hear something deeper than storms. A heartbeat, slow and steady, echoing from the place where Fenrir was bound. And Odin, seated upon his throne, said little. But the lines upon his face deepened, and his ravens brought him darker tidings with each flight. He knew what the frost whispered. He knew whose breath carried upon it. For Fenrir, silence was no longer emptiness. It was transformation. At first he had raged against his bonds, roaring until the mountains split. Then he had grown quiet, patient, letting time pass like rivers beneath his stillness. But now something else stirred in him, not mere patience but anticipation. His dreams grew sharper. No longer blurred visions but scenes vivid as memory. He felt the snap of Gleipnir in his bones, the taste of freedom in his mouth, the tremble of gods scattering before his steps. He saw the sun vanish between his teeth, the sky crack beneath his howl, Odin swallowed in shadow. And when he woke from these dreams he no longer felt despair. He felt certainty. The chain still held. The sword still pried his jaws apart. But within him the wolf was no longer waiting idly. He was waiting with purpose. He was waiting with joy. The 9 realms carried on their lives. Mortals sowed and reaped, gods feasted and quarreled, giants plotted in their icy halls, dwarves hammered treasures in the deep. Yet beneath all their tasks was the same shadow. The shadow of a wolf, bound yet unbroken, patient yet eager, waiting for the hour that would shake the roots of the world tree itself. The air grew colder. The earth grew restless. The skies darkened sooner. And all who lived knew in some deep and wordless way, the wolf was no longer only waiting. The wolf was listening. The wolf was preparing. The wolf was ready. In the golden halls of Asgard, the gods gathered often, their voices rising like clashing steel. Thor slammed Mjolnir upon the floor, sparks flying as he growled. We were fools not to strike the wolf when we had the chance. Now the world chills with his breath. Each winter grows longer. Each omen darker. Shall we wait until he devours us all? Frigg, her eyes shadowed with foresight, lifted her hand. Do not mistake silence for safety. His bonds hold but not forever. To strike at him now may hasten what is already written. Heimdall, whose ears heard the faintest whispers, nodded grimly. I hear him still. Even bound he speaks in the silence. His heart beats like a drum beneath the world. His dreams shake the air. Every howl of wolves in Midgard is but an echo of his voice. Then Odin rose. His single eye burned with wisdom gathered from pain, from sacrifice, from visions. He spoke with a calm that silenced even Thor's fury. "You speak of choice," he said. "But there is no choice. I have seen it. No chain holds forever. No weapon will strike him down before his hour. All that remains is to prepare. To gather warriors, to forge strength, to wait for the day the wolf will rise." The hall fell silent. For none could argue with fate, not even gods. In Midgard, mortals looked upward and trembled. There were days when the sun dimmed as if a shadow passed before it, though no cloud moved in the sky. Farmers would stop their plows, lift their eyes, and whisper, "The wolf licks at the sun." There were nights when the moon turned blood red, glowing like an open wound. Children clung to their mothers, and hunters laid down their bows, saying, "The wolf's hunger spreads across the sky." Storms rose from nothing, lashing villages with wind and rain. Wolves howled at their edges, their cries mingling with thunder. People spoke of hearing another voice within those howls, deeper, vaster, the chained wolf calling from afar. And when earthquakes split the ground, cracks yawning open in the earth, they said, "The wolf shifts in his bonds. The world trembles with him." Bound upon his rock, Gleipnir biting into his flesh, Fenrir closed his eyes. And in the darkness, he saw the future as though it were memory. He saw the ribbon quiver. First a tremble, then a snap. No sound in all the 9 realms could match it, louder than thunder, deeper than the cracking of the world itself. Gleipnir breaking was the sound of fate fulfilled. He felt his limbs surge free, strength rushing into his body like fire flooding dry wood. His paws struck the ground and mountains crumbled. His howl rose to the sky, shattering clouds, darkening the sun. He saw himself leap, vast beyond imagining, his jaws stretching from earth to heaven. He swallowed the sun, plunging the world into darkness. He swallowed the moon, leaving only stars that flickered like dying embers. And he saw Odin. Always Odin. The one-eyed god stood before him, spear in hand, ravens circling overhead. There was no fear in his face, only grim certainty. But certainty did not save him. Fenrir lunged, jaws closing, the spear shattering like twigs. Odin swallowed into silence. The wolf woke, eyes blazing, chains trembling. Drool poured from his jaws around the sword that gagged him, hissing as it struck the ground, forming rivers that carried his fury away. He did not struggle. He did not roar. He simply waited. For he knew now that Gleipnir's breaking was not possibility. It was promise. Even bound, the wolf haunted Asgard. Tyr walked often in silence, his sleeve empty, his heart heavy with the cost of betrayal. He did not speak of Fenrir, yet every glance at his missing hand reminded the gods of the price already paid. Freya prayed to the Norns, but the weavers of fate only watched with unreadable eyes, their hands moving ceaselessly, their threads tightening into patterns she could not change. Thor grew restless, his strength unspent, his rage looking for an enemy he could strike. Yet no hammer could break prophecy. And Odin drank deeply, wandering often in search of knowledge, of some hidden secret that might undo what was already written. Yet he always returned with the same shadow in his eye. None could escape the truth. The wolf was bound. But fate was not. It began quietly. One morning in Midgard, the fields lay white with frost, though no season of cold had been expected. Farmers brushed their hands over stiffened crops and muttered of strange chills. Hunters returned with fewer animals, their breath fogging in the air though the sun still hung high. The frost did not melt. Not after one day nor two. It clung to the earth, thickening, hardening, spreading. Rivers slowed, then froze. Lakes cracked with ice. Winds carried snow even where no snow should fall. And the people of Midgard knew. This was no ordinary winter. This was the first breath of Fimbulwinter. The old seers had warned of it. 3 unbroken winters, no summer between them, no respite. A chill so deep it would starve the world. And with that chill would come strife, for hunger breeds war and war breeds death. The first flakes drifted silently, but in every flake was the whisper of the wolf. Villages grew restless. Mothers clutched their children closer, whispering that the wolf stirred in his bonds, that his breath carried the frost into the world. Warriors painted wolves' heads on their shields, daring fate to come quickly. Kings gathered their men, for even in the shadow of Fimbulwinter, men chose war, raiding neighbors for food, for shelter, for survival. The seers spoke with trembling voices. When the wolf's breath freezes rivers, no man shall find peace. When the wolf's shadow falls upon the sun, brothers will slay brothers and sons will raise steel against their fathers. When the wolf howls, the world shall end. And so even before Fenrir rose, his name tore families apart, filled battlefields with blood, and sent mortals into both fear and worship. In Asgard the gods watched as the frost spread. Snow fell even upon their golden halls, its flakes glimmering like ash upon their feast tables. The mead in their cups chilled faster than it could be drunk. The fires in their hearths sputtered, no matter how high they were piled. "This is the sign," Thor growled, his breath steaming. "The wolf's breath has reached us." His chains weaken. Freya shook her head. "Not yet. But it comes. I feel it in the threads of fate." Heimdall, standing at the edge of Bifrost, closed his eyes and listened. "I hear it," he whispered. A sound beneath the sound. Not storm, not frost. A heartbeat. Slow. Heavy. The heartbeat of the wolf. And Odin, though he said little, tightened his grip upon Gungnir. For he knew better than all that this was only the beginning. On the stone where Fenrir lay, Gleipnir trembled. Not enough to break. Not enough to fail. But enough to hum with the faintest shiver. Fenrir felt it. His eyes snapped open, glowing like coals in the darkness. His body shifted, muscles swelling against the ribbon, drool hissing as it struck the ground. For the first time since his binding, Gleipnir quivered beneath him. The wolf did not roar. He did not thrash. He only lifted his head slightly, the sword still prying his jaws apart, and in the depth of his throat came a sound. It was not a cry, not a growl. It was a howl, low, deep, stretching across the realms like the echo of eternity. The 9 realms shuddered. Wolves in Midgard froze, then raised their heads and howled in answer. The seas churned as Jormungandr stirred. In Hel's realm, the dead shifted uneasily, their hollow eyes lifting as if they too heard. And in Asgard the gods stopped in their tracks. The sound rolled over them, through them, within them. The howl of prophecy. When Fenrir's howl broke the silence, the 9 realms shuddered. In Midgard, wolves and forests froze, then raised their muzzles to the sky and answered, their voices twining together in a chorus so vast that men dropped their tools and fled indoors. In the seas, Jormungandr stirred, coils thrashing, sending waves against every shore. In the shadowed halls of Hel, the dead turned their hollow eyes upward, hearing the echo as though it reached even through death. The sound rolled through Yggdrasil itself, vibrating through root and branch. Birds nesting in its limbs scattered, their wings beating frantically. Squirrels fled along its bark, carrying terror with every bound. Even the Norns at its roots paused in their weaving, their hands stilling upon the threads for one breathless instant. It was not a howl of rage. It was not a cry of sorrow. It was the sound of inevitability. As the last echoes faded, snow fell harder across Midgard. Rivers froze solid. Forests groaned beneath the weight of ice. The sun's light dimmed, pale and weak, unable to warm the world. Fimbulwinter had begun in earnest. Men turned upon one another, for hunger gnawed deeper than loyalty. Brothers drew swords against brothers, fathers against sons. Villages raided villages, spilling blood into the snow. The earth became not only cold, but crimson. The seers had spoken true. When the wolf's breath froze the world, men themselves would help bring the end. Some mortals clung to rituals. They built great pyres, flames leaping high into the frost-heavy air, praying that the fire might hold the wolf at bay. They left offerings at the edges of forests, meat, blood, even children, hoping to appease the chained one. Others abandoned prayers and turned instead to war, believing the end was certain and only strength could carry them through. They marched into snowstorms with axes high, shouting the wolf's name as though to call him sooner. Yet some whispered differently. Around small fires, hidden from the eyes of kings and jarls, they prayed not against Fenrir but to him. They called him not devourer but liberator. They begged him to tear down the order of gods and men alike, to build something new from the ruins. Fear and faith mingled in his name, each as dangerous as the other. In Asgard, the howl silenced laughter in golden halls. Thor gripped Mjolnir until his knuckles whitened, his jaw clenched. "The wolf calls," he said, voice like thunder. "The frost spreads. We must act." Freya's face was pale, her eyes heavy with knowledge. "There is no action that will change what is woven," she murmured. Heimdall stood at Bifrost, his ears ringing. "I heard it within the howl," he said. Not just sound words, though no tongue spoke them. It said, "I am coming." And Odin sat silent upon his throne, ravens shifting uneasily upon his shoulders. He did not need to speak. His silence was enough. For all knew what he foresaw. This was only the beginning. Far away on his stone, Fenrir stirred. Gleipnir quivered again, faint but undeniable. The ribbon still held, but each tremor was a heartbeat, each vibration a promise. Fenrir's eyes burned, his breath steaming, his chest rising with the rhythm of prophecy. He had howled once and the 9 realms had trembled. He would howl again and the 9 realms would crack. And when the chains finally snapped, the howl would become war. The wolf closed his eyes, strength coiling within him, waiting, patient no longer, but eager. For the world was moving toward him now, whether it wished to or not. The first howl had shaken the 9 realms. The second shattered them. It began deep in Fenrir's chest, a rumble that rolled through the stone beneath him, rising into a growl that swelled and swelled until the sword that gagged his jaws trembled. Then it broke free, a howl so vast, so terrible, that the air itself seemed to rip apart. The mountains quaked. The seas rose. The skies cracked with lightning though no storm had gathered. The sound pierced every realm, carrying not only through ears but through hearts. It was not a sound of hunger. It was not a cry of sorrow. It was war-made sound. In Midgard, rivers burst their banks, flooding villages already buried in snow. Great forests splintered as winds tore them apart. Wolves howled in every valley, their voices joining, until it seemed the entire world was one vast chorus. In the seas, Jormungandr writhed, his coils crashing against the shores, sending tidal waves across Midgard. Sailors clung to their ships in terror, whispering the serpent's name as they prayed in vain. In Hel's realm the dead stirred. They rose from their endless silence, their hollow voices echoing faintly as though answering the wolf's cry. Hel herself sat unmoving on her throne, half her face alive, half lifeless, but her eyes gleamed with recognition. Her brother was stirring. Their time was near. Even the branches of Yggdrasil groaned, sap spilling like blood, as if the world tree itself strained beneath the weight of the sound. In Midgard, men abandoned their fields and halls, for what good was labor when the earth itself trembled? Armies marched through snow not for conquest, but for survival, seizing food from neighbors, driving swords through kin. The old seers wept openly. The wolf has spoken twice, they said. The third howl will break the world. Around fire pits some still prayed, not for safety but for swiftness. They begged Fenrir to rise sooner, to tear the sky, to end the endless hunger of Fimbulwinter. Better an end than a slow death in snow. And so his name lived on their lips, as curse, as plea, as hope. In Asgard, silence fell heavy after the howl. No song rose, no laughter echoed. The golden halls felt hollow, colder than the frost outside. Thor slammed Mjolnir against the floor. No more waiting. The wolf stirs. His chains weaken. Let us strike. Let us end him before he breaks free. Freya shook her head. And if we fail? If he breaks free sooner for our folly? You would bring doom with your own hands. Heimdall's voice was low, troubled. The second howl was not only sound. It was call. He called to the serpent. He called to the dead. They will rise when he rises. Finally, Odin spoke, and his voice was heavy with the weight of visions. The third howl will come. When it does, there will be no turning back. Ragnarok will begin. The gods lowered their heads, each knowing the truth of it. They could prepare, but they could not prevent. On his rock, Gleipnir strained. The ribbon still held, but now it quivered constantly, humming with the wolf's breath, vibrating with each slow movement of his chest. The impossible materials from which it was forged, cat's footfall, woman's beard, fish's breath, all groaned as if even impossibility had limits. Fenrir's eyes glowed like suns in the frost. Drool poured in rivers, steaming as it struck the frozen ground. His muscles flexed, his body coiled, his strength mounting. He had howled twice. The 9 realms had trembled twice. The third howl would not only tremble them, it would shatter them. And he waited, patient no longer, but eager, his silence between howls more dreadful than the sound itself. For silence meant only one thing, the storm gathering its strength. As Fimbulwinter deepened, hunger gnawed at every hearth in Midgard. Fields lay barren beneath ice, rivers froze solid, and herds withered. Men turned upon one another, not only for conquest, but for bread, for survival. The old seers had spoken. In the wolf's breath, brothers shall slay brothers, fathers shall fall by sons, mothers shall see their children raised against them. And so it was. Villages that once feasted together now clashed with axe and spear. Brothers fought in bloodied snow, their cries swallowed by the endless storm. Fathers raised blades against their sons, and sons struck down fathers, not for glory but for meat, for shelter, for life. The frost did not relent. It only deepened, as though the wolf's breath thickened with each act of bloodshed, feeding upon mortal despair. In Asgard, the gods felt the tremors of Midgard's collapse. Valhalla filled quickly, warriors dying not only in great battles but in petty wars of survival. The halls rang with endless feasting and clashing, yet even the bravest Einherjar knew their revels were but preparation. They sharpened their swords, trained with fury, and drank heavily, for they knew the end approached. Thor walked the halls restless, his hammer sparking with unspent rage. The serpent coils tighter. The wolf howls louder. When will we strike? Odin gave him no answer, only silence. For he had seen what was to come, and words would not change it. Even Frigg, wise in foresight, wept quietly in her chambers, for she knew what her husband's silence meant. Then came the third howl. It began as a silence so deep that the world itself seemed to hold its breath. Snow ceased falling, wind ceased howling, waves stilled. For one heartbeat all was still. And then it came. The sound tore through the realms, louder than thunder, deeper than the cracking of mountains. It shook Yggdrasil to its roots, sap bleeding from the great tree like wounds. It shattered ice across Midgard, split seas across Jormungandr's coils, and shook the halls of hell until the dead themselves rose in answer. The gods staggered, their ears ringing, their halls trembling. Mortals fell to their knees, blood streaming from their eyes and ears as the sound tore through them. It was not merely a howl. It was a command. The command of destiny. And Gleipnir cracked. At first only a faint snap like a thread fraying. Then another. The impossible ribbon shivered, strands of silence unraveling, fibers groaning as though even impossibility could not withstand prophecy. Fenrir felt it. His eyes blazed brighter, his muscles surged, his chest heaved. Drool poured like rivers, steam rising as it struck the frozen earth. He strained, and for the first time since his binding, Gleipnir stretched. It did not yet break. But it had weakened. And that weakness was enough. Fenrir's jaws strained against the sword, his teeth grinding against its steel. His breath burned like fire, his body trembled with the force of his own certainty. He knew, not guessed, not dreamed, but knew, that the next time he howled, Gleipnir would fail. And when it failed, the world would fall with it. In Asgard, Odin rose from his throne. His ravens circled above him, their cries sharp and frantic. His voice was heavy, grave, final. The wolf's bonds weaken. His howl has cracked the unbreakable. Ragnarok comes. He called the Valkyries to gather more warriors, to fill Valhalla with every fallen soul that might lift a sword. He sent word to dwarfs to forge weapons greater still, though he knew no forge could make what fate could not be changed. He himself prepared, sharpening Gungnir, whispering runes into its shaft. Yet he did so knowing what he had seen, that his spear would break, that his body would fall, that his end was written in the wolf's jaws. Still he prepared. For though he could not change his death, he could meet it as a god should, with steel, with courage, with eyes unflinching. After the third howl, the 9 realms held their breath. The snow still fell, but slower now, each flake descending as though reluctant. The seas churned, but their waves seemed held back as if waiting for something vast to stir. Even the dead in hell's halls grew quiet, their hollow eyes turned upward, listening for the next sound. The silence was worse than the howl. For all knew that silence was not peace. Silence was the drawing of a bow before the arrow flies. Silence was the inhale before the storm strikes. Silence was the moment before Gleipnir broke. Upon his stone, Fenrir lay coiled with power. The ribbon still held, its surface smooth, its glow faint. Yet cracks spidered through it, faint lines shimmering like lightning trapped within silk. Each breath of the wolf widened them. Each shift of his massive body pulled them taut. The sword still gagged his jaws, but his teeth bit deeper, steel groaning beneath his bite. Drool poured in rivers, hissing as it struck the frozen ground, forming streams that smoked and bubbled with heat. His eyes glowed with fire, his chest heaved with power, his muscles coiled tighter than mountains. He did not howl again, not yet. For he knew the next cry would not only tremble the 9 realms. It would tear them apart. And so he waited, his silence more dreadful than thunder, his patience sharper than any blade. In the depths of the sea Jormungandr writhed. His coils tightened around Midgard, waves towering higher than mountains, venom spilling into the waters until the fish themselves floated lifeless. Sailors cried out in terror, but their voices were swallowed by the storm. In the shadowed halls of hell, the queen of the dead rose from her throne. Her one half-living face was calm, her corpse face unblinking, and her eyes gleamed with certainty. She lifted her hand and the dead stirred. Bones clattered, flesh shifted, shadows deepened. An army of silence, waiting for her word. The 3 children of Angerboda stirred as one. The serpent tightened, the queen rose, the wolf strained. And the 9 realms groaned beneath the weight of their awakening. Fimbulwinter showed no mercy. Snow fell endlessly, burying villages until only rooftops remained. Wolves prowled openly in the streets of men, no longer feared but revered, for people whispered they were the heralds of Fenrir. Crops lay dead beneath ice, and even kings fell to starvation, their thrones crumbling in frost. Wars raged endlessly. Sons no longer buried their fathers, for the ground was too hard to dig. Brothers no longer wept for brothers, for tears froze before they fell. The world of men collapsed not only from hunger but from despair. And still the frost deepened. Still the skies darkened. Still the wolf strained. In Asgard the gods met once more, but their words were heavy with dread. Thor roared that they must strike, must march, must shatter the wolf before his chains failed. Heimdall warned that the serpent's stirring meant the seas themselves would rise. Freya whispered of Hel's armies gathering, though no one yet dared to name them aloud. Odin raised his hand, silencing them. His face was grim, his eye burned with certainty. The wolf will break his chains. The serpent will rise. The dead will march. This is no longer prophecy. This is now. The gods bowed their heads. They knew his words were true. And far away, bound upon his stone, Fenrir smiled. It was not joy, not cruelty. It was recognition. The smile of one who has waited, who has endured, who has known all along that the hour would come. The crack spread wider through Gleipnir. The ribbon quivered louder, each strand groaning. The sword in his jaws bent, steel warping beneath his bite. His breath poured out in clouds of steam, his body pulsed with strength. One more howl. One more breath. One more moment. And the world would break. All the 9 realms fell into a dreadful stillness. Snow froze mid-fall. The seas stilled, their waves trembling but unmoving. The wind hushed, the earth held its breath, even the branches of Yggdrasil grew quiet. It was not peace. It was the silence of a bowstring pulled taut, the stillness before the strike, the moment before the howl. The gods in Asgard stood frozen, cups of mead clutched forgotten in their hands. Mortals in Midgard lifted their eyes, knowing without knowing what was about to come. Even the dead in Hel's halls tilted their hollow heads, waiting. And then Fenrir inhaled. The sound of his breath alone sent tremors through the stone beneath him. Gleipnir quivered, cracks glowing, fibers unraveling. His chest swelled like a mountain rising, and in that moment, all creation seemed to lean toward him. The howl erupted like the tearing of the sky. It was vast, unending, a sound that shattered the silence of the worlds. Gleipnir snapped with it, the impossible ribbon unraveling in flashes of light, each fiber bursting apart with the sound of thunder. The sword that gagged his jaws split, fragments of steel flying like meteors, molten with the force of his bite. Fenrir surged upward, limbs free, body vast beyond imagining. His paws struck the ground and the earth cracked, valleys tearing open, rivers bursting free of their frozen beds. His tail lashed like a storm wind, his eyes blazed like suns, his roar swallowed the world. The 9 realms shook. Yggdrasil groaned. The end had come. From the sea, Jormungandr uncoiled. His body rose higher than mountains, his coils breaking shores, his head breaching the sky. Venom poured from his jaws, falling like rain, burning earth and water alike. His body circled Midgard, pressing tighter, cracking its very foundations. Thor raised Mjolnir in Asgard, for he knew the hour had come. His battle was waiting in the serpent's shadow. In Hel's halls, the queen lifted her hand, and the gates burst open. The dead poured forth an endless tide, bones clattering, shadows shifting, voices hollow but rising in one terrible chorus. They marched across ice, across frost, across shadow, filling the spaces between realms with their endless steps. Hel followed, her face half living, half dead, her eyes fixed upon Asgard. The armies of silence had risen. In Asgard, the gods stood at the edge of their halls, watching the sky darken as Fenrir's shadow rose. "He is free," Heimdall whispered, his voice low and tight. "The wolf is free." Thor gripped his hammer. Freya raised her blade. Tyr stared at his empty sleeve, knowing at last the cost of that lost hand. And Odin, All-Father, stood tall, Gungnir in his hand, ravens circling above. His eye burned not with hope, but with resolve. He had seen this moment in visions uncountable, had felt the jaws close around him in dream after dream. And now it was no longer vision. It was here. Fenrir lifted his head to the sky, his jaws opening wider than mountains, his howl echoing one last time. The sun quivered in the heavens, the moon trembled in its path, and the stars dimmed. The wolf had broken his chains. The serpent had risen. The dead had marched. And with that, the first step of Ragnarok was taken. The end had begun. The sound of Gleipnir's breaking still echoed across the 9 realms, but Fenrir no longer lay bound. He stood, vast and terrible, his fur bristling, his breath steaming like fire. Drool poured in rivers from his jaws, each drop hissing as it struck the earth, burning it black. His eyes glowed like suns at dusk, not warm but devouring. His roar swallowed the sky, louder than storms, deeper than mountains splitting. He lifted his head, jaws opening wider than any beast should, wide enough that the sun itself seemed small before him. And with each step he took, the ground shattered. Valleys split, mountains groaned, rivers boiled. The 9 realms trembled not only at his strength, but at the certainty of his coming. The wolf was free. The wolf was moving. The wolf was doom. At the same time, Jormungandr rose higher from the seas. His body encircled Midgard, tightening, crushing, his scales gleaming like iron in the dimming light. Venom streamed from his jaws, raining down into waters and lands, killing fish, poisoning fields, searing the flesh of men. His eyes glared at the horizon, searching, knowing his foe was near. For Thor the Thunderer awaited him. Their battle was written as surely as Odin's fate was written in the jaws of Fenrir. Each thrash of his coils shook Midgard, each strike of his tail raised waves that swallowed ships whole. The seas were no longer seas. They were the body of the serpent. In Hell's halls the gates stood open, their hinges shattered by her will. The dead poured forth, countless, endless. Bones rattled, flesh shifted. Shadows walked with steps that shook no snow but carried weight nonetheless. Their voices rose in hollow cries, not of sorrow but of obedience. Hell, their queen, walked among them, her face half living, half dead, her eyes fixed upon the horizon. With every step of her army, frost spread deeper, shadows lengthened. The living felt their approach not with sight, but with dread. For even the bravest warrior's heart trembled when the sound of countless dead echoed on the air. And far in the south, another terror stirred. The fire giants of Muspelheim lifted their swords of flame, their eyes glowing like embers. At their head rose Surtur, the fire-bringer, his blade burning brighter than the sun itself. He looked toward Asgard, and his steps set the world ablaze. For it was not only wolf, serpent, and dead that rose at Ragnarok. Fire too marched. Fire to consume what frost had spared. In Asgard the sky dimmed, the halls trembled, the gods stood ready. Thor lifted Mjolnir, sparks dancing along its head. Heimdall raised the Gyllerhorn, though he had not yet blown it. Freya stood armed in her armor of gold, her blade gleaming. Tyr tightened his grip on his sword with one hand, the sleeve of his other arm hanging empty. And Odin, Allfather, strode among them, Gungnir in hand, his ravens circling. His face was grave, but his eye burned with a fire that no fear could extinguish. He spoke, and his voice rang across the halls. The wolf has broken free. The serpent coils. The dead march. The fire rises. Ragnarok is here. Prepare yourselves, for the end is upon us. And the gods raised their weapons, their voices joining as one. For though they knew their doom, they would not meet it cowering. And so it began. Fenrir strode forward, each step cracking the earth. Jormungandr writhed tighter, venom pouring in rivers. Hell's army spread across the frost, filling the land with silence and shadow. Surtur's flames rose, setting the horizon ablaze. The 9 realms shook, the world tree groaned, the sun dimmed, the moon trembled. The end was no longer prophecy. It was here. It was now. At the edge of Bifrost, Heimdall, the ever-watchful, lifted the great horn. For centuries it had rested at his side, waiting for this one moment, the hour that would shake all realms. He raised it to his lips. The sound burst forth, deeper than any storm, brighter than any trumpet. It rang across the 9 realms, through snow and fire, through sea and shadow. It echoed from the roots of Yggdrasil to its highest branches, from the halls of Asgard to the fields of Midgard, from the depths of hell to the flames of Muspelheim. It was the call of war. It was the cry of the end. Every warrior in Valhalla heard it and rose, their cups falling, their songs silenced, their swords lifted high. The Einherjar, the chosen dead, filled the halls with thunder as they rushed to Odin's side, their armor gleaming, their voices roaring. The Gyllerhorn had been sounded. Ragnarok had begun in full. The gates of Asgard burst open, and the gods strode forth, their weapons blazing, their voices like thunder. Thor rode in his chariot, drawn by goats whose hooves sparked lightning. Mjolnir gleamed in his hand, and the sky answered with storms. Freya led her Valkyries, wings flashing like silver as they soared across the darkened heavens. Their cries lifted the hearts of the Einherjar, their swords blazed as they cut through frost and shadow. Tyr strode forward, one hand upon his sword, his empty sleeve a banner of sacrifice. His face was grim, but his steps unyielding, for he knew his hour had come. Heimdall stood upon the Bifrost, sword shining, horn in hand, his eyes burning with resolve. He had sounded the end, he would face it without fear. And Odin, Allfather, rode at their head, Gungnir in hand, Sleipnir's hooves pounding the frost. His ravens circled above him, croaking their cries of battle, their wings black against the dimming sky. The gods rode out not for victory but for honor, not for survival but for destiny. They knew the end awaited them. Yet still they raised their weapons and their voices, for they would meet it as gods. Fenrir strode across the frost, vast beyond reckoning. Each step cracked the world, each breath steamed like fire, each growl shook the heavens. His jaws opened wider than mountains, his teeth gleamed like swords, his eyes blazed with hatred and certainty. He did not run. He did not rush. He marched, slow and steady, for he knew the gods awaited him, and he knew none could turn him aside. His howl rose again, shaking the sky, and the sun dimmed until it seemed no more than a pale ember. The moon quivered, shadows stretched, stars flickered. Behind him wolves gathered, countless, endless, their howls echoing his. They filled the fields of frost, their eyes glowing, their bodies surging like a tide of fur and teeth. The wolf was not alone. He was legion. On the horizon Jormungandr thrashed, waves swallowing ships, venom hissing into the air. Thor's eyes locked upon him, his grip on Mjolnir tightening, for he knew their clash would decide not life but death. From the south the flames of Surtur spread higher, brighter. His sword, burning with the fire of Muspelheim, glowed brighter than the sun itself, his steps leaving rivers of molten earth in his wake. His laughter was deep and cruel, a sound that promised not victory but obliteration. The frost, the fire, the serpent, the dead, all gathered. And at their head strode Fenrir, jaws wide, eyes burning, prophecy fulfilled. When Heimdall's horn faded, silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then the earth itself roared with war. From the gates of Asgard poured the Einherjar, warriors chosen in death for this hour. Their shields gleamed, their swords sang, their voices thundered as they charged across the frost. At their sides flew the Valkyries, wings flashing, their cries like lightning. And from the horizon came Hel's army of the dead. Bones rattled, flesh shifted, shadows marched. Their hollow voices rose in answer, not with passion but with inevitability. They did not fight for glory. They fought because destiny commanded. When the two armies met, the frost shook with their clash. Steel struck bone, shadow devoured flesh, cries of the living and the dead mingled into one terrible chorus. The fields of snow turned red, then black, soaked with blood both warm and cold. The dead fell, but they did not stay fallen. They rose again, silent, relentless, pressing against the living with endless weight. The Einherjar cut them down again and again, their glory shining, their songs unbroken. Yet for every dead that fell, more rose behind them and the tide pressed forward. The battle of Ragnarok had begun. Upon the shore, Thor faced Jormungandr. The serpent rose higher than mountains, his body circling the world, his breath venom. Waves crashed beneath him, storms whirled above him. His eyes burned with hatred, his fangs dripped with poison that seared the sea itself. Thor lifted Mjolnir, lightning flashing in his wake. His goats stamped their hooves, sparks flying, the chariot rolling across the storm. The serpent hissed, jaws wide, venom spraying in torrents. Thor answered with thunder, his hammer striking lightning into the serpent's scales. The air burned with their clash, the sea boiled, the sky cracked. Each strike of Mjolnir shattered mountains. Each lash of Jormungandr's tail crushed ships, cities, forests. Their battle was not merely fight, it was storm, it was earthquake, it was the tearing of the world itself. Thor roared, Jormungandr hissed, and the 9 realms trembled beneath their war. And in the midst of it all, Fenrir strode forward. The battle of gods and men, the clash of serpent and thunderer, the tide of dead against the living, all were noise to him. His eyes burned with one vision only, Odin. He saw the All-Father astride Sleipnir, spear in hand, ravens circling. The god's face was steady, grim, unflinching. His eye locked upon the wolf's, and for one moment, time itself seemed to pause. Prophecy had spoken it. The wolf would devour the father of all. Now prophecy became reality. Fenrir roared, a sound that silenced even battle, and the gods turned to watch. His jaws opened wide, so vast they stretched from earth to sky. His breath poured across the field like fire, like storm, like death itself. And Odin spurred Sleipnir forward. The god and the wolf rushed toward one another, the clash of destiny unstoppable, the moment the 9 realms had awaited since the first telling of the Norns. Everywhere doom unfolded. Surtur's sword blazed higher, flames rising until the sky itself burned. His fire clashed with the frost of Fimbulwinter, ice cracking and boiling away, yet the fire only grew, consuming all. Hel's army pressed closer, shadows tightening around the Einherjar, their cold hands dragging warriors into silence. Heimdall raised his sword, cutting down giants that strode from Jotunheim, yet his eyes never left Loki, for he knew their battle was written too. The field of Ragnarok stretched endless, filled with storm, fire, shadow, venom, steel. And above it all strode Fenrir, jaws wide, eyes blazing, prophecy burning alive. On the shores of Midgard, thunder met venom. Thor hurled Mjolnir again and again, each strike splitting the sky with lightning, each blow crashing into Jormungandr's scales. The serpent writhed, his body shaking the seas, his tail smashing mountains to rubble. His venom poured in black torrents, hissing as it struck land and sea, burning forests to ash and turning rivers to poison. Thor roared with fury, lightning flashing from his beard, his eyes aflame with wrath. He leapt from his chariot, storm wind carrying him, Mjolnir blazing in his hand. The serpent reared high, jaws wide enough to swallow the god whole. Venom sprayed from his fangs, a flood of death. But Thor charged through it, hammer raised, thunder screaming in his wake. Mjolnir struck. The serpent shrieked, his body thrashing so violently the seas themselves split, waves rising like mountains before crashing down. His coils loosened, his head shuddered, his eyes dimmed. Jormungandr, the world serpent, fell, his body crashing upon Midgard, his coils crushing forests, his weight cracking the earth. But Thor staggered. The venom had entered him, black and burning, searing his veins. He took 9 steps, each heavier than the last, Mjolnir still glowing in his hand. Then he fell, his body collapsing beside the serpent's, the thunder silenced. Thor and Jormungandr lay dead together, their battle ended as it was foretold. In the heart of the battlefield, Odin spurred Sleipnir forward, Gungnir blazing in his hand. His ravens cried above him, their wings cutting the storm-dark sky. His warriors roared at his side, but none could stand between him and the wolf. Fenrir charged, his paws shattering the earth, his jaws opening wider than the horizon. His eyes blazed with hunger, with hatred, with destiny itself. Odin hurled Gungnir. The spear flew like lightning, straight and true, runes glowing upon its shaft. It struck the wolf's hide, and shattered, its runes scattering like sparks, its shaft splintering like wood. The wolf did not falter. He lunged, jaws wide, and Odin met him with no fear. The All-Father's eye burned, his voice thundered one last command to his people, his hand still raised in defiance. And Fenrir swallowed him whole. The battlefield fell silent for a heartbeat. Even gods trembled, even giants paused, even the dead stilled. The sight of Odin's end was the death of hope itself. But the wolf roared, jaws dripping with blood, eyes blazing brighter than before. He had devoured the father of all. Prophecy was fulfilled. Upon the Bifrost, another clash echoed. Heimdall, the watchman, stood with his sword raised, eyes burning, ears straining. And before him came Loki, father of chaos, trickster of the gods, his smile sharp, his eyes gleaming with madness. Brother against brother, Loki sneered. How fitting that it should be us. Heimdall said nothing. He charged, his blade flashing, his horn at his side. Loki met him with daggers gleaming, his body twisting with tricks and shadows, striking and vanishing, mocking and laughing. Their battle was swift, fierce, unrelenting. Heimdall struck true, his sword biting into flesh. Loki struck back, his dagger piercing deep. Again and again they clashed, their blows leaving both bleeding, staggering. And at last both fell. Loki laughed as blood poured from his lips, Heimdall silent as his sword slid free of Loki's heart. Together they collapsed, lifeless, their duel ended in mutual death. The battlefield of Ragnarok burned and froze at once. Fire raged from Surtur's blade, frost bit from Hell's march, venom still hissed from the serpent's corpse, thunder still echoed faintly from Thor's fall. And at the center of it all stood Fenrir, jaws dripping, eyes blazing, Odin gone within him. The end was here. The doom of gods and men alike was no longer prophecy. It was present, alive, roaring with the wolf's breath. Though Odin had fallen, swallowed in the wolf's jaws, one god rose to answer his death. Vidar, the silent son of Odin, strode across the battlefield. He spoke no words, for words could not undo what had been done. His face was set, his step steady, his purpose unshaken. In his hand he carried no great hammer, no shining spear. Yet upon his foot he wore a shoe, thick, black, forged from all the scraps of leather ever cut by men. For centuries mortals had tossed aside the ends of their work, and the gods had gathered them, weaving them into Vidar's strength. He stepped forward, and with that shoe he drove his foot into Fenrir's lower jaw, pinning it to the earth. The wolf roared, shaking the skies, but Vidar did not falter. With his free hand he seized the wolf's upper jaw. His grip was iron, his strength unyielding. With a cry that shook the heavens, he tore the jaws apart. Fenrir shrieked, his body convulsing, his blood pouring like rivers, his eyes blazing one last time. And then he fell, jaws split, body broken. The wolf was dead. Odin was avenged. But the cost had already been paid. From the south, Surtur advanced. His sword blazed brighter than the sun, its flames consuming frost, shadow, flesh, and stone alike. Giants followed him, their laughter cruel, their bodies burning with the fire of Muspelheim. He raised his blade and with one stroke he split the sky. Fire poured across the realms, flames devouring forests, seas boiling, mountains collapsing. The fields of battle, soaked with blood, ignited, the dead and the living alike consumed. The fire spread to Yggdrasil itself. The world tree groaned, its roots trembling, its branches burning. Sparks leapt into the heavens, stars falling, the sky itself cracking like shattered glass. There was no resisting it. Surtur's fire was not victory. It was ending. The 9 realms fell together. Midgard burned, its seas boiling, its forests ash. Jotunheim cracked, its mountains shattering, its giants consumed. Hell's realms split, the dead scattered, shadows torn apart by flame. Alfheim dimmed, its light extinguished. Nidavelir's forges melted, rivers of metal pouring into fire. Asgard itself shook, its golden halls crumbling, its gods fallen, its warriors consumed. The Bifrost cracked, its rainbow shattered into sparks that fell like meteors. The wolf lay dead, but his jaws had closed upon Odin. The serpent lay slain, but Thor lay lifeless beside him. Heimdall and Loki lay still, their duel ended in blood. The dead returned to silence, the fire consumed what frost had spared. The world was undone. The fire had raged, the frost had bitten, the wolf had roared, and the gods had fallen. Fenrir lay torn upon the battlefield, yet within his jaws still lingered the silence of Odin's death. Thor's hammer lay beside the serpent's corpse, the thunder silenced forever. Heimdall and Loki lay entwined in blood, enemies and kin alike consumed by destiny. The sky was ash. The earth was flame. The seas were poison. Yggdrasil trembled, wounded, but still standing, a shadow of hope in a world undone. This was Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, the end foretold since the first breath of creation. Yet in the silence after fire and frost, one truth remained: endings are not nothingness. From ash new roots grow. From silence new songs rise. From death life stirs again. And so the story of Fenrir, son of Loki, devourer of gods, breaker of chains, ends not only in destruction, but in the promise that even the greatest doom is but one turn in the endless wheel of fate. For the wolf is gone, but his echo lives. His howl remains in the winds of Midgard, in the storms of the sea, in the silence of dark forests where men still whisper his name. Fenrir is not forgotten. Fenrir will never be forgotten. And thus ends the tale of Fenrir, the bound wolf, the devourer of gods, the shadow of destiny. His story, like the howl that shook the 9 realms, still echoes across time, a reminder that even the strongest chains cannot hold forever, and that fate comes for all, gods and men alike. If you have journeyed with me through this long night of myth, I thank you. May the story of Fenrir carry you into dreams, fierce and eternal, where wolves still roam the edges of the world. Until our next tale, may the old gods whisper to you in sleep, and may you wake with the memory of their echoes.